Thank you, Tim Kaine. We're in for a real treat from our keynote speaker tonight, and he would not be here tonight were it not for his introducer, Fred Scott. Fred is a longtime Sorensen supporter and state board member. Fred is a longtime friend. In fact, when I was a very young reporter and Fred was a very young candidate, he once ran in a multi-member district for the House of Delegates in Virginia in the early 1970s. The district included Charlottesville and Albemarle and several surrounding counties. He's since decided he would rather help train candidates than be a candidate. Part of the reason may be that the district included the city of Charlottesville, and Fred is a Republican. Fred is an incredibly generous philanthropist and a very generous Marine. Please welcome Fred Scott.
You just wasted a minute, but thank you. 80 years ago, minus a few, a very rare, but perhaps not unique individual arrived on this planet. It was in Wichita. Early on, in the first 20 years of his life, he learned that he rather liked the sound of his own voice because his family was in the bus business, and he got to use this thing to call buses, and maybe if you're lucky, you'll hear him do it. And then in the 60 years ago, that's 60 years ago, he did a couple of really smart things. The first thing was he went to Quantico and became a United States Marine. There's a lot of Marine Corps uniforms here tonight. And it's funny, when a man like Jim Lehrer comes to town as a Marine, other Marines sort of show up. You see the men in blues. I won mine at Paris Island. I'm very, very proud of that. There were other Marines here who are not in their blues. I'm not in mine. They used to make the uniform out of cheaper material, and it shrinks. But I'd like you to take this opportunity to honor what is probably the senior officer in the room, who happens to be the founder of Sorensen. He's a Navy captain, Lee Middleditch. He's sitting to Jim Lehrer's right over here. Lee, stand up just for a minute, and then as you're doing so, I would like all Marines in the room and anyone who ever wore a United States uniform to stand up right now. Isn't that great? Isn't that great? Thank you very much. So about 80 years ago, he found a young lady named Kate. She's sitting right here. I put her at my table, you notice. Kate, would you please stand up? Thank you for bringing Jim Lehrer to Richmond. And they did a remarkable thing. They were both young reporters, and they went to vote in Texas. They were political reporters for the Dallas Morning News, and they went to vote, and it happened to be a primary election, and the registrar said, sure, you can vote. Where do you live? I live in town, so-and-so, no problem. Which party you in? He said, none of your bloody business. We're reporters. We're independents. We're not going to tell anybody how we vote. They might think we report improperly. That's amazing when you think how young they were to make that decision. And they walked out and they didn't vote then. They haven't voted since. Now, I don't think either one of them would tell you that's a good idea for anybody in this room, but I want you to remember that act of conscience. Marines grunt a lot. We sometimes get things right, sometimes we don't. But conscience is what it's all about. And his character and his integrity carried through for 2 decades with the NewsHour. And you know, it seems to me sort of unusual that there's only one person on the planet who's ever been asked to moderate, I think it's 18 presidential debates in the United States of America. It has to do with character, it has to do with fairness. And I'd like you to meet and welcome Jim Lehrer.
For somebody who only made it to the rank of sergeant, he did pretty well, I thought. Thank you, Fred Scott. All the things that were said about Fred in the brief introduction of him, and he promised to beat up on anybody who talked too long. All I can say is my friendship, new friendship that Kate and I have with Fred is real, and everything that has been said about him tonight that is positive is at least 70 to 80% correct. One thing about Tim Kaine's remark about my lieutenant governor stories, I have written 7 novels about the lieutenant governor of Oklahoma. First time I met Tim, he was in fact the lieutenant governor of Virginia. We sat next to each other at some white tie, black tie, wah-wah tie dinner in Washington, and you said, I said, who are you? And you said, oh, I'm the lieutenant governor of Virginia. And I said, well, you're not going to believe this, but I write books about lieutenant governor. He said, you're right, I don't believe you. Anyhow, I don't know if you remember this or not, but I said, I'll send you a complete set of my lieutenant governor novels. You know, and I've been very busy. And when I saw you, and then I realized that this is the lieutenant governor thing, and I thought, oh my God, Tim's going to remember that I never sent the books. But I'll get them to you. I'll get them to you. I probably figured at the time, well, what the hell, he's a lieutenant governor. He's never going to amount to anything, so why should I worry about it? By the way, the lieutenant governor of Oklahoma, his name was Mack. And it's M-A-C-K. It took me, you know, a good 6-7 minutes to devise his name. And he always said Mack, as in truck, M-A-C-K. That's all I'm going to tell you about that. Look, what I came to say is something very simple and very direct, and that is congratulations to each and every one of you present here tonight or not present here tonight who has had anything to do with the Sorensen Institute of Political Leadership. If I was the kind of person who went around saying, hip, hip, hooray, I would say, hip, hip, hooray, Sorensen Institute. If I was the kind of person who said, rah, 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 onward, onward, I would say, rah, 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 onward, onward, Sorensen Institute. What you all have been up to the last 20 years, to me, speaks loudly and clearly to what really matters in our democratic society. And I particularly identify with it because I have spent except for the time I was in the Marine Corps, I've spent my entire adult life, more or less, from my point of view at least, in the same business that you all have been in at the Sorensen Institute. We, too, of the world of serious journalism generally, and the PBS NewsHour specifically, we believe in the value and worth of civil discourse, not for its own sake, but for the sake of our wonderful democratic society. We too believe that Americans, as many of you have said already tonight, that Americans of different political, philosophical beliefs, persuasions, and even, yes, obsessions, who are not willing to communicate about those various differences in a civilized manner, seldom get done the most serious work of a democratic society. And that is what is called governing. And it's called governing because that's what it is. That's the whole business of a democratic society. We too believe, we in journalism believe, that civility is not just a personal characteristic that comes with birth. It can be taught. It even can be ordered. I learned that in some ways when I was in the Marines. When I first went in the Marine Corps, I heard a lot of talk about teaching people leadership. And I was very skeptical of that, frankly. I thought that there were people who were born leaders, and then there were the rest of us. Not true, I learned. You can teach leadership skills to a born follower or even to a born non-follower. I'll give you a quick for instance. When I first went into the Marines, I walked with the balls on walked on my balls of the feet, on balls of my feet. In other words, I walked like this. A drill instructor, the first drill instructor I ever encountered at Quantico, said to me, "Don't walk that way anymore. The first thing that should touch the floor are the heels, not the balls of your feet." I promise you, that was 50 years ago. I have yet to walk like that again. The important thing to remember here is that we in the world of serious journalism believe that the reason to learn civility is because it is an essential tool of the communicating trade. Only a fool, or to be more gentle and precise, only a person who does not wish to succeed in the world of politics and government, as in the world of journalism and information, would not employ civility in his or her pursuit of happiness and of accomplishment. To be specific about our NewsHour way of doing things, first and foremost, we do not bring people on television to beat up on them. If that kind of thing turns you on, I say to people, turn to another channel to get your kick. You're not going to get that on the NewsHour. We treat every guest with respect for them as individuals, but just as importantly, with respect for what they believe. Fairness to ideas is as important in serious journalism as it is in serious politics and serious government, as is fairness to individuals. I am aware that there have been people out there waiting for more than 40 years, watching the NewsHour, waiting for me to say, after some political person has just responded to an answer from a question of mine, "Liar!" I have yet to yell that, and it never will be yelled by me or anybody else in our organization. It's okay for a viewer to yell that if you hear something and you think that person has lied, but nobody who does the interviewing at the NewsHour will ever do anything like that. We do not use our program as a vehicle to show how tough we are. The fact is that 90% of good professional, serious television interviewing, in fact, is about listening. It's not about asking questions. Anyone who can read or write can come up with a question. But the professional interviewer is the one who's confident enough, informed enough, relaxed enough to actually listen to the answers. My favorite made-up story of that, I use all the time, is that I'm interviewing, let's say, a senator. And I say, "Senator, do you believe we should sell more grain to Cuba?" "Yes, Jim, I think we should sell more grain to Cuba. But before we do that, we should bomb Havana." And I say very quickly, "What kind of grain, Senator?" Went right by me because I had written my questions ahead of time and I was not listening to the answers. I'm sure all of you who have watched television or listened to radio interviewers, you've heard that. Hey, ask, did you hear? Well, that's where you can tell the amateur from the professional. On the business of being civil, of being fair, one of the major reasons I feel so strongly about the work of the Sorensen Institute, right now particularly, is that I happen to believe, as has been commented on earlier, that I think that one of the most serious losses we as a society have suffered in recent years is that of civil discourse. There is a meanness of communication alive in the land right now in some places. I see it in the mail, in the email that we get at our program. I hear it myself on television and hear it on the radio. I read it in newspapers and magazines, and God knows it's on the blogs and elsewhere all over the internet. The controversies involving Congress, the president, budget, spending, taxes, as well as war and all other matters have definitely heightened the passion of the rhetoric and the discourse at this particular moment. But there will always be differences, because there must always be differences for us to have a democratic society. But we are civilized people, and we should disagree in a civilized manner. We should acknowledge the right of others to disagree with us. We should acknowledge the possibility that sometimes, on some very rare occasions, we might even be wrong. And strange as it may seem, we might learn more from listening than from talking, and definitely more from talking than from shouting. That is the business of the Sorensen Institute, and that's why I would say again, as an underline, hip, hip, hooray, Sorensen Institute. None of this is easy for any of us right now. We Americans are living through all kinds and sizes of information revolutions, fully blooming, just beginning, or just around the corner revolutions. There are these little machines. I have one here. We all have one of these here. Well, on these little machines, every fact or semi-fact, every lie or every opinion anybody wants to get can be had in a few seconds. Everything from most of our ages, birthplaces, phone numbers, home addresses, music and travel preferences, directions to the nearest Tex-Mex restaurant, the menu there, and the way to make a reservation, to the headlines and most detailed news and feature stories from thousands of publications and books about literally every subject imaginable in almost every language imaginable. It is no exaggeration to say, as many experts are now lamenting, America and many other parts of the world are literally being drowned by a flood of information. Good information, bad information, harmful information, helpful information, informative information, useless information. You can find a way to make a bomb. You can find ways to disarm a bomb, ways to get high or to get very low, to get fat or to get very skinny, to get very well or to get very dead, and most anything else in between, below or above. All of us, literally every one of us in this room and all other rooms, must now live with one of the major new realities that have come from the information floods and revolutions. And that, of course, is the disappearance, once and for all, of privacy. If you dare write something malicious, salacious, or simply stupid or embarrassing in an email to a colleague, a friend, or a total stranger, be prepared to have it eventually shared with somebody, maybe all kinds of somebodies. That includes secrets, public secrets, private secrets, military, national security, intelligence, artistic secrets, whatever kind of secrets they may be. Not just in emails, but through various other electronic and technological means. Documents once sealed for whatever reasons initially are more commonly unsealed than ever before because of another whole set of new reasons. The public's right to know is a growing fierce force in all of our lives, in the whole world, among real people as well as the so-called world of celebrities. That applies doubly, of course, even in cases such as Lindsay Lohan and Charlie Sheen, when nobody wants to know one single thing more. But there it is to know anyhow, like it or not, take it or leave it. In short, privacy, as most of us are used to it, is now over. And once and for all over, as I said. All we can do now is get used to it. Beware of it, adjust to it. Adjust to it, that may be what all of us, each in our own way, has to do with many of the information revolutions and their many forms. A lot of what we do in this new world and how we do it on the NewsHour comes from some guidelines that we have had in place and in our work spirit for some time. It's been a while now, but I was asked by the sponsors of a journalism forum at Aspen some time ago if I had any guidelines, personal guidelines that I used for the practice of journalism, and if so, would I mind sharing them? I wasn't the only one who was asked to do this. Now, here in part is what I sent them. These are my guidelines, the NewsHour guidelines for the practice of journalism. Do nothing I cannot defend. Cover, write, and present every story with the care I would want if the story were about me. Assume there is at least one other side or version to every story. Assume the viewer is as smart and as caring and as good a person as I am. Assume the same about all people on whom I report. Assume personal lives are a private matter until a legitimate turn in the story absolutely mandates otherwise. Carefully separate opinion and analysis from straight news stories and clearly label everything. Do not use anonymous sources or blind quotes except on rare and monumental occasions. No one should ever be allowed to attack another anonymously. And finally, I am not in the entertainment business. Those are our guidelines. Now, a few final words to and about each and every one of you here tonight. Unlike most fancy dinners, such as this, I know for a fact there is one overriding reason all of you are here. It's the same reason that brought me here as well. We all care about politics. We all believe politics is a good word. We even believe that all politicians are not only not bad or evil people, they are mostly good people, honest people. In fact, the percentage of good and evil among politicians is about the same as it is among, let's say, preachers and priests, and say, yes, journalists, and let's say even yes, U.S. Marines. Without politics and politicians, there would be no government. Our democratic society at all levels, from the neighborhood to the White House and beyond, don't just need politics. They cannot exist without politics. So I say to all of you, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for participating in the most important process of our democracy, the process called politics. I thank particularly those of you who have, are, or will offer yourself as candidates for public office. And I would like just a show of hands of how many of you fill that bill. You have run for public office, you are running for public office, or you plan to run for public office. Thank you to all of you. It is difficult for anyone to do that, to run for public office anytime. It's particularly difficult right now. The 24/7 news cycle that has been mentioned, and the other forms of so-called information, true and or false, they are now part of life in politics. And I salute you and I commend you for being willing to go through what it requires, including your loss of privacy. And sometimes you have to endure lies and other unfair attacks from political opponents. I also understand and I appreciate the fact that running for office means, for some of you, the possibility of losing in public, right out there in front of everybody you've ever known and everybody you've loved. More people went to the polls and voted for somebody else than voted for me, and everybody knows it. Everybody you've ever known knows it, and that hurts. Nobody, except possibly professional athletes, have such public losses. And they get paid much better than you politicians do, for the most part. So, hip hip hooray for you politicians, past, current and future candidates for everything. Without the likes of you, we would have no government. And at the risk of saying something truly controversial, let me say, I believe life without government would be bad for our neighborhood, our town, our county, our state, our country, our schools, and our world. Hip, hip, hooray for government. Hip, hip, hooray for all of you who work in the process of politics that causes government to happen. Happy 20th birthday to the Sorensen Institute. Finally, I want to say something very special about Richmond. I've been to Richmond many times. I love coming to Richmond. But Fred Scott related to this, said something that relates to this. There was a time in the 1950s when I came to Richmond 4 or 5 times a day, spiritually, because I was going to a small junior college in South Texas in a place called Victoria. It's on the Texas Gulf Coast, halfway between Houston. Show of hands, people have heard of Victoria, Texas. You know where Victoria is? Okay. Halfway between Houston and Corpus. I worked in the bus depot while I was going to this junior college. And one of my duties, as Fred said, was to call the bus on the PA system. And here's what I did. May I have your attention, please? This is your last call for Continental Trailways, 8:10 p.m. Silverside's air-conditioned through-liner to Houston, now leaving from lane 1 next to the building. For Inez, Edna, Ganado, Louise, El Campo, Pierce, Wharton, Hungerford, Kendleton, Beasley, Rosenberg, Richmond, Sugar Land, Stafford, Missouri City, and Houston. Connecting in Houston for Huntsville, Buffalo, Corsicana, Dallas, Shreveport, Jackson, Meridian, Augusta, Raleigh, Richmond. Washington, Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York, and Boston, all aboard. Don't forget your baggage, please. Thank you very much.